Hello, and welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the ups and downs of the creative process and how to keep it moving. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. I am a writer, singer, improv comedy newbie, science fiction geek, and creativity coach who loves helping right-brained folks get unstuck. I am so excited to be coming to you with interviews and coaching calls to show you the depth and breadth both of creative pursuits and creative people, to give you some insight into their experiences and to inspire you. As you know, if you've been listening to this show for a while, I define creativity very broadly and love breaking our typical mold of what creative looks like. Today's guest is one of those who might surprise you, but he absolutely has followed his curiosity. Kyle Fletcher, also known as the Drink Pro, has followed his own interest into the world of cocktails, whiskey, beer, and wine, with a focus on appreciation and moderation. As we discuss, if you're binge drinking, it's mighty difficult to notice nuances of flavor, much less enjoy them. Kyle tells us how he first started exploring the world of whiskey and other drinks in detail, how he's learned the most and come to appreciate experimentation, and how his interest in performance found an outlet on his YouTube channel, where he shares his excitement for new drinks and new flavors. He also gives us some advice on how to start our own explorations without a Sherpa. If you don't drink, as I largely don't, and fear this episode will leave you feeling left out, I can assure you that you'll still find it an interesting journey into a more unusual passion. Here's my conversation with Kyle Fletcher. Kyle Fletcher, I'm psyched to talk to you today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, your thing is so off of the typical path that people expect when they hear what I do. And that's part of why I wanted to talk to you, because it seems to me like there's a whole lot of curiosity following going on for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you tell me how did you get to be so interested in all of the nuances of different kinds of drinks, and how did you get to your philosophy of what drinking should and shouldn't be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of what I did initially, like so many people, was I started drinking with family, and I saw it was like the social activity. My family would get together, they would all have a beer or two and talk about what's been going on, catch people up with each other. And then as I sort of watched more and more people that were more my own age, I would see that they weren't drinking that way. It was something that was an escape. It was something I thought was kind of an unhealthy way to live your life. And I thought there was sort of, a chasm between how people had been approaching this, historically significant drink. I mean, spirits and beer and wine have been around for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. But we've always, treated it in my family like sort of a component of being social together. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of bring that about in younger groups and in groups that, otherwise hadn't approached drinking that way. They've been approaching it like a way to run away. Mm-hmm. And I got really lucky. I met with a couple people when I was in school in Bloomington, Indiana, and they really kind of mentored me in whiskey tasting and the different interesting nuances of Scotch is where I got started. But after that, I sort of discovered bourbon, and I discovered cocktails and this whole other world. There's a couple of, YouTube channels I saw that were doing this kind of thing in a more narrow context. There was the Whiskey Tribe is one of the bigger ones. And they really, highlight the fact that this is kind of a fun social activity, and there's a lot of interesting flavors you can pull from whiskey. And I'd always loved food. I love the different flavors in food. That's another thing that was big in my family, was eating together. Mm-hmm. Then I kind of found other places where I could discover those flavors. For a short period of time, I smoked cigars and kind of enjoyed the nuances of cigar tasting. Kind of got away from that and moved more into the realm of spirits. And it's just been a lot of fun to do this deep dive and see how many different notes you can pull out. I think a lot of times, people see wine tasting, and they'll see somebody go through these 10 or 12 different flavors in a glass of wine, and they'll go, there's no way that's all actually in there. And at some point it feels like they're making it up until
Mm-hmm.
you sit down with them and you have them explain where those notes are coming from and why they're saying, oh, I get this sort of, light, blueberry character. It's like, well, there's no blueberry in that wine, but there's
Mm-hmm.
certain things that are reminiscent of blueberry. And once you learn to find them, you can't unfind them. So it becomes a lot of fun. And then you pick up a random wine, something that, like, my dad has always drank, the yellowtail, and I'd pick it up and I'd smell things and taste things in it that he'd never picked up before. And, it's
Mm-hmm.
all about being able to share those experiences and say, hey, look for this interesting thing. And something, you already do.
Yeah, it's not like having a can of Coke.
Right. No.
I mean, what would you get? You get sugar and acid, and yeah, you probably don't want to go there.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because hearing you talk about this is reminding me. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie French Kiss with Kevin Kline and Meg Ryan, but
No, I haven't.
there's, she's in France. She hooks up with Kevin Kline, who's basically this crook, and they end up on his family's vineyard, and there's a scene where he's explaining to her, she finds this little box with all of these bottles in it, which was like a childhood project of his, and it's got all of the like local herbs and trees and flowers and things in it, and he says, smell these, and these are all in the wine that grows around here. And then the next time she has a glass of wine, she actually notices that kind of thing.
Yes, that's
remember,
exactly what it is.
seeing that scene and thinking, oh, now I want to do that. And I've never really been into wine, but I did. This is the other thing that came to mind while you were talking. I did go to the International Pinot Noir celebration 3.5 years ago, 4.5
that sounds
years
like
ago.
fun.
It was a blast. I went because, among other things, it looked like one hell of a party. And you talk about amazing food. They had fabulous chefs and more alcohol than I could imagine. Because apparently that group just like they have this vault that they keep these things in. So part of the reason that people go is that they get to try things they would never get to try anywhere else.
Oh, absolutely.
And I got an email before I went that said, do not feel that you have to finish everything you are given, or you will be on your back before lunchtime, which is certainly true. But it was the 50th anniversary in 2015 of growing Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So their grand seminar was all about champagne and how champagne is made. And, and I found it absolutely fascinating. It was like, okay, how do you get the bubbles into the champagne,
Yeah.
But they came around, and I think, it was at least 2 or 3 different flights of, these are the wines that go into it, and then this is what it's like at this stage, and this is what it's like at this stage, and all of that. And it was the first time in my life there was one of them that they were saying, there were notes of green apple. I remember specifically because I was like, oh, look, yes, there are. Isn't that cool? I got one. I'm surrounded by complete wine snobs, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, there's a thing here.
Yeah, that could be. I'm glad you mentioned, though, the fact you don't have to finish them all and you don't have to keep drinking them all. I think I've been to a couple whiskey events where people get way overserved, and a lot of it is because they're not used to this idea of you don't have to finish the glass. Mm-hmm. Next to almost every when you go to these events and you walk around, they have booths. And also when they have like seminar style tastings where you're all sitting at tables and there's someone up front, almost always there's going to be a container next to where people are sitting where you can pour out the extra wine or pour out the extra whiskey or whatever. That people kind of think, I think when they first come into this, they assume, oh, that's for people who can't handle it, or that's for people who didn't like it. It's like, no, it's so you can retain some sense of sobriety throughout this whole process.
Yeah. It was very interesting for me because I really don't drink much at all. And I didn't know anything about wine. And one of my friends, when she dropped me off at the airport before I went, looked at me and said, you're going to come back a wine snob, aren't you? And I said, I have no idea. But, when everything that you know about wine, you've learned in 3 days from some serious wine snobs, you do indeed turn into the world's most ignorant wine snob, which is what I am now. But yeah, and people were just, I wonder what the soil content, because this was on a college campus that's a dry campus, which also cracks me up, in the summer, and people would either dump into I don't remember even what they're called, or just dump it out on the ground. And it does feel wasteful, when it's like,
Oh, sure.
you've never got a chance to try one of these before and you might not ever get the chance again. And you do feel like you should finish the whole thing just
Oh,
because
absolutely.
it's this thing that, where else were you going to encounter it? But yeah, you
Right.
absolutely would end up on the floor. And because
Oh,
I
yeah.
really don't drink and have no tolerance, I did the second night. I realized, okay, as of 9:00, I am only having water
Yeah.
because
Oh,
I
yeah.
will wake up in the middle of the night with a headache again. And I don't really want to do that. And also this is me. So let's just water only from X point. So
Well, and hydrating is a big thing too. A lot of people don't drink enough water, putting aside whether or not they're drinking alcohol. And, if you don't stay very fully hydrated, even if you don't get drunk at all, you keep drinking, a steady amount for a long period of time at one of these events, you're going to wake up in the morning feeling pretty dried out and maybe have a headache and maybe feel a little unpleasant. It's, I always tell people when you're done with something like this, go home and try to drink as much water as humanly possible before you go to bed. Yeah, you're going to get up a couple times in the middle of the night to pee, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I promise you.
Yeah, you in the morning, you will thank yourself for doing that the night
Yes,
before.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you met these people who introduced you to all of these things. How did that look? Did it? I mean, it had to have been somewhat of a gradual thing, and how did you
Yeah.
react at first?
Yeah. Well, I'd always enjoyed spirits more than beer. I kind of, learned about drinking at all through beer and wine, but they were never really my thing. And I got interested in whiskey pretty quickly. I think part of that was because at the time I was smoking cigars with a lot of people who were much older, and cigars and scotch are very often paired together. But some of those people that were, at these sort of cigar meetups said, "Hey, you should come over to the couple bars locally. Like the Irish Lion is one in Bloomington that I really like, and that's got a lot of great scotch." They took me over there, and we tried several different things together. I think my first reaction really was it was a bit of a struggle because some of the flavors, and particularly in scotch, can be difficult. There's definitely going to be an alcohol burn with your high proof spirits, but with scotch, you're also going to end up into the world of things like Islay scotches, which are really smoky and peaty, and sometimes will even have an iodine flavor or a rubber flavor, and that's something that's really difficult to kind of wrap your brain around when you're expecting a relatively sweet fruit forward spirit. But it's really been a journey of just my curiosity always getting the best of me and always wanting to find out more and learn more. I've always been somebody who, when I get interested in something and curious about something, I become a little bit obsessive, and I just have to go find out more and learn more and dig as deep as I can. So it's served me well so far in the world of spirits. And, I started out learning about scotch and then kind of worked my way into bourbon, and now I've been reading up on cocktails. I've got several different cocktail books. I bought all the accoutrement to make cocktails like I'm in a bar with shakers and mixing glasses and everything. And it's just because I started reading about, well, why do they do it this way? Why do they use these metal shakers? What's the purpose of using the stirrer? Easy example, the swizzle, the stirring spoon that you tend to see people use. It's going to have a little spiral on the spoon itself. And the purpose of that is you can pour the liquor onto that spiral and it will trickle down slowly into the cocktail. And when you mix the liquors together more slowly, it changes the composition before you go through with a stirring or a shaking process. And like the chemistry of all of that is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I was just thinking this is an incredibly chemical thing. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I'm not a chemist. I don't know a whole lot about the chemistry, but what I do know is that there's a lot of what affects the flavor, particularly with cocktails, is going to be the speed of the combination and the aggression of the cooling process. So if you cool something more rapidly or more aggressively, or you agitate it more aggressively, it's definitely going to modify the flavor profile. The most easy example to think of is if you use some sort of like egg white in a cocktail, all of those creamy cocktails that you'll see at like a fancy cocktail bar have egg whites in them. And the way they get them to be creamy and uniform throughout the glass is through an emulsion. So you have to really shake incredibly hard to actually emulsify the egg. If you don't shake hard enough, you're going to end up with a cocktail that starts to separate kind of midway through. And it's little things like that, the little details that can make a huge difference for somebody. If they're not going to just pound the cocktail back, if they sit there for a while with it and it starts to look unpleasant, that's going to speak to the bartender. So I learned a lot from talking to just some local bartenders. I would pull up a stool and start asking them questions, and I was really surprised how willing and happy they were to talk about what they were doing. Every bartender I sat down with who wasn't, slammed and busy all the time, if they had time on their hands, they loved to talk about their practice. They felt like it was a real art that they were engaged in. And I got to agree, the more I learned about it. These people I would say, okay, well, what have you been playing around with? And they would make me a cocktail that wasn't on the menu, that wasn't, involving spirits or syrups that I'd ever heard of before. They put like some elderflower liqueur in with this elderberry simple syrup. And, it was unusual and interesting and engaging, both to my mind and to my palate. So that was everything I needed to hear and see, was not to get me hooked.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling that may have been something of a symbiotic thing, because it certainly sounds like having an audience like that must really work for a bartender who likes to try new stuff. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They love to experiment with me, and I'm happy to be experimented on.
So I'm still not quite past the idea that there's egg white in a lot of cocktails. How?
Yeah, that bothers people. It's best not to think about it sometimes when you're drinking those cocktails, but yeah, luckily, the egg whites tend to be, well, first off, they tend to use pasteurized eggs. So, the biggest concern about things like salmonella is alleviated. You're not going to have that problem. But even still, the egg white, it's a pretty versatile part of the egg in a lot of different cooking. Like I said, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a chef either, but I know that you can use egg whites in a lot of fun, interesting ways as a binding agent and as an emulsifier. So it's a fun thing to experiment with, for sure.
Do you have any idea how they first came to be in cocktails?
Oh no, I'm not sure about that. Unfortunately, my history of cocktails is weaker than my history of whiskey. I know a lot more about where bourbon and Scotch comes from, but
that's okay.
Yeah, it must have been a happy accident. That's all I can figure. There's no way somebody did that with real intention.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you think about an artichoke and what you have to go through to get to the edible part of the artichoke, you really wonder who figured out that there was even anything edible in there.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, egg white in a drink sort of feels the same way to me. Like, who would have thought to put it's not something, anybody who's ever even just scrambled eggs knows you got to work pretty hard to evenly mix an egg white even with its yolk. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that just doesn't seem like your first choice.
Well, the one that, in that similar vein, the thing that I always think about is the first Scotch drinkers. So when I was talking about the Isle of Scotches before, part of that is a function of how they had to dry the grains. You have to dry the grains before you can actually distill the spirit. And the drying process is typically done with just, air and time if you're in a warm, dry climate. But if you're not, you have to use some sort of heat. And the only thing they had in Scotland in that area at the time was peat. They were essentially burning earth to dry these grains. But the end result of that is something that tastes like medicine and maybe even poison. And I always kind of taste that and I go, how would somebody first taste this and go, yes, that's fine. That's what it's supposed to be. I can't wrap my head around that. Like they must have been very desperate.
Well, and the same thing when you said that there are flavors of rubber. That was what I thought.
Yeah.
I was like, why would you want to drink something that tastes like rubber?
Yeah, those are hard. Those are pretty advanced flavors. I have a hard time with a lot of those. But a lot of people really like them. They really seek it out. The smokier, the better. The more chemically, the better for some people.
It's fascinating to me because, even I don't know much about Scotch. I've just been to Scotland for the first time. I I went to Edinburgh Castle because, of course, you have to go to Edinburgh Castle. And after I managed not to blow off the edge of Edinburgh Castle, I went into the little place where it said that they had tastings because I was like, okay. And they had a cream liqueur that, honestly, I tasted it and I just, somebody, possibly you, would have, if I had said what I was thinking, would have probably whacked me over the head, because I just kind of tasted that and said, so it's Bailey's.
Yeah.
Which, I spent 6 months in Northern Ireland. I know enough to know that that's probably not the thing to say out loud in Scotland, but yeah, I mean, that's what it made me think of. And I know Bushmills, which is whiskey from Northern Ireland. So I don't know if that's what I would have thought of if I had tried actual Scotch rather than the cream liqueur.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was disappointed that I didn't get a chance to actually just taste the stuff without having to order an actual drink that I knew I wasn't going to drink all of.
Right.
And so, but I know, even without having done that it is, it's like wine. There's such a huge range of, rubber and peat to none of that.
Oh yeah, you can get to the sweetest, most caramel, chocolate, toffee, something that tastes like straight up candy.
Do people get super snobby about that? Like, if you just want the sweet stuff, you're just a lightweight, and
yeah, people. There's a huge rift between. Actually, there's a couple different rifts. Basically, just wherever you're located, it's all very regional. I think in part because the process of making whiskey in different regions has changed a lot over the years. And so bourbons have a lot of government regulations around them. So if you're making whiskey in the United States and you're making bourbon, which is even a smaller subset of U.S. whiskey, you're going to have a much narrower flavor profile than somebody in Scotland, where you can have a lot wider of a variety of flavors and processes to develop the liquor. I think that there's a big attitude with people, especially people that like the Islay scotches. They like the smokier flavors. They kind of keep to themselves. There's people that call it the cult of Islay. I've heard that before. It's a very in-group way of thinking. And I think the same thing's true with bourbon. People who really love bourbon are going to just dismiss anything that's Scotch, anything that's Irish, and just say, no, I drink bourbon. That's all. And they get kind of insular with their bourbon people, which I think is a real shame. I think that there are some really great Scotches and Irish whiskeys out there that have a lot of sweet, warm components that are much more akin to a bourbon. And there are some people right now in the United States, particularly a company in Texas called Balcones, who are making whiskeys in America that are very reminiscent of the Scotch techniques and the Scotch flavors. And so I'm really glad to see some people are trying to venture outside of those typical norms and those almost stereotypes at this point. It's important, I think, to explore your palate, because you might find something you really like. My dad had always tried whiskey kind of just to humor me, and he didn't really care for it that much. But he was like, well, I can see he likes it. He's passionate about it. And then just recently, actually, I got him a pour of Lagavulin 16, which is a smoky Islay Scotch. He loved it. I've never seen him enjoy a spirit more. And I would have never in 1,000 years expected him to like that stuff. But, it just goes to show you that you never really know what you're going to like until you try it.
It's true. It's very true. And for as much as I don't typically drink, one of the things that I do love, though I will admit that I tend to limit it to when I get a nasty sore throat, because it's the best thing in the world for it. So I'm probably, diminishing it to medicine. But when I lived in Northern Ireland, pretty early on, somebody asked me if I would like a hot whiskey.
Mm.
And, I said, I don't know. What is that?
Yeah.
And they got me one. And, again, it was like one of these things where I'll take 3 hours to drink one of those. So It's not very hot by the time I get done with it. But I loved it. It was like one of the best things that I learned about, and also how to make, when I was over there. And I don't do it that often, but yeah, get me a cup of hot water and a shot of whiskey and some lemon and cloves and sugar and a cinnamon stick, and I am good to go for a while. And it really is the best thing for a sore throat. It's amazing.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's very much like a hot toddy. It's almost the exact same. And those, that kind of mix of the medicinal qualities of whiskey it's almost kind of a joke for some people because, during Prohibition, doctors would write prescriptions to allow people to get medicinal whiskey, and everybody kind of did that with a wink and a nod and knew what was really going on. But there are some things about the alcohol content that'll soothe your throat, that will, it's good for, again, there's a fine line between use and abuse. So people always should be careful. But like if you have, somebody's having a panic attack, half an ounce of whiskey, just a little bit, not even a full drink, it is something that will sort of slow the processes down just enough that can help people, feel a little bit calmer if they don't have access to, something more traditional. I know that I've had panic attacks in the past. That luckily I've been able to, develop some breathing techniques and other ways to deal with it. But when I didn't have access to anything and I was just, running on fumes, just literally a half an ounce of whiskey, and I would be able to like take enough of a deep breath to slow my process down. Now, I don't advocate that. I need to be clear. That was not a healthy way to deal with this, but the fact that it actually worked. And, and this isn't somebody, I was not at the time, and I am not today drinking, many drinks a day or anything like that. It's still an occasional thing, and it always should be, in my opinion. But it's, interesting to see that this alcohol, this thing that was so demonized, can be used in positive ways. And like I said, that comes back to the idea of wanting to, have this social engagement be a fundamental part of the drinking experience for people. This isn't just about getting drunk. This isn't about, trying to forget your problems. This is about getting together and having a good time and enjoying life and your family and your friends.
Yeah. And with the whole medicinal thing, I'm also thinking of all of the, older classic novels or whatever else that's of a certain era where something's wrong with somebody and the solution is bring a brandy,
Yeah. And I mean, it was used as antiseptic during the Civil War. It was. I mean, we didn't have anything to knock these people out. Give them some whiskey. That's the best we can do.
Right. Not that we recommend that you do that now.
No, right. Well, now we have, right. There is unavoidably, there's harm potential with spirits. It can cause problems. So, it's always good to drink responsibly, but it's also worth, remembering there are more targeted remedies now for almost everything. But that opens up whiskey to be enjoyed in a social context.
Right. So where do you, how do you encourage people to be more social without overdoing it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a lot of it is sort of self-awareness. I think a lot of people get caught up in, the enjoyment of the moment makes it easy to kind of lose pace of yourself and your understanding of, how am I feeling? How am I doing? Am I, self-monitoring? And at a certain point, you're unable to do that at all. And that's why I think it's so important to start the night in that mentality. Start the night saying, hey, I'm going to have a couple of drinks. I'm going to pay attention to how I'm feeling and respond accordingly. Because usually when you see people that are having really bad experiences with alcohol and they're going way too far, it's because they hit the ground running and they started very strong. And by the time they had a chance to catch up and have that sort of self-reflection moment, they were too deep into the spirit and they weren't able to really do a proper self-reflection. So I think the big thing for me is sort of a mindfulness, honestly, just understanding yourself and knowing what you like and what you need. Nobody wants to get sick. Nobody wants that experience. It's a terrible experience for everyone. But I also think that, frankly, if you're going to drink on a regular basis, that's going to happen once at least. And it's because it's a sort of a moment of learning. You understand, okay, that's a place I can never go again. That's what too far looks like in an extreme sense. And so now I start to walk back from that and I understand, okay, when I drank this many drinks, I got sick. So let's cut that in half and see what that looks like. And, did I feel impaired? Did I feel, like I could enjoy the night and keep drinking with people and tasting new things? Or did I feel like I was being, hindered in that regard as well? There's a balance for for everybody. And I think that, the other big component of this is, I talked about self-awareness. There's also sort of a avoidance of social pressure. There's always going to be people that push you to drink more. It's a constant. And I strongly recommend, not doing that, obviously. But if people are doing that, I always ask them and say, well, why do you want me to drink more? Is it because you want me to have a good time? I'm having a good time. I don't need another drink. I'm okay. I'm doing great. And I'll sit here and I'll sip this drink with you, but I'm not going to. The shots are a great example. Shots are the enemy of spirit enjoyment, as far as I'm concerned. Because if you're taking a shot of straight liquor, now there's a difference between a shot and a shooter also, because shooters are designed to be taken at one shot, and they're very often majority not liquor. But taking shots, an ounce and a half of straight whiskey or vodka or whatever, straight to the head, that is just a recipe for disaster. I know some people really like it, but I can't wrap my head around doing that as an enjoyment technique. So, if somebody's trying to pressure you into things like that, say, this is what I always do, and it works a lot. If somebody wants me to take a shot with them, I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'll buy a drink and I'll take a drink with you. I don't have to drink an ounce and a half right away. I can sit here and take this eighth of an ounce of a sip, of this spirit, and we're still drinking together. We're still having the social experience. Unfortunately, there's not a good metric that works for everybody when it comes to avoiding overindulgence. But I think the diligence of self-knowledge and the not being afraid to confront people if they're trying to push you. Those two components are really critical to making sure that you have a good time. This isn't about them. This is about your journey and your spirits and your experience with them. That's putting that all together is really important.
Yeah, I'm reminded that I saw something a couple months ago that I'd never thought about it before, but as soon as I saw it, I thought that's so incredibly true, which said alcohol is the only drug you have to explain not using.
Exactly.
I mean, I would add caffeine in there too, as someone who doesn't really do caffeine, but yeah, when I thought about that, I was like, yeah, why is that? I mean, there is this cultural thing that like there's something wrong with you if you don't drink, or if you don't drink as much as I do, or as much as I think you should. Right. And I feel like that's, so destructive. And I don't know. I mean, because when I think of over drinking, I automatically think of college campuses, because I feel like that's, the stereotypical example. And I don't know if it starts there, if that's where the whole pressure thing starts and then people carry it with them. But it's so unfortunate. I mean, like I said, I can nurse a drink for hours,
right?
And still not finish it. And I'm totally okay with that. And, it's really not anybody else's. It's not anybody else's business if I sit there with a glass of, water or seltzer or whatever.
Right.
But people make it their business, or try to. And it's like, this is not about you. This is about me. I mean, I have a friend who kind of has the ultimate excuse. She is so allergic to alcohol that it will kill her if she has it, and that kind of thing will stop people dead in their tracks.
Oh, yeah.
And no pun intended. That was bad. But she's a great bartender. And she will tell the story.
That's fantastic.
Of how when she was tending bar when she was a teenager, but she tells the story of being at a bar where she was not drinking, and questioned by the police when she was a kid, and they called her father, and he came to pick her up, and he said, "No, I know she hasn't been drinking." And the officer just looks at him and says, "And sir, how would you know that?" And he said, "Because she's still breathing."
Wow.
So she can be around it, she just can't have it.
Yeah.
And people do respect that. If you say, if I drink that, it will kill me, that does kind of put a different light on things. But for the rest of us, it can be really, really awkward to say, sorry, just not my thing. People just don't want to accept that. Even when it's coffee versus alcohol, they just don't grasp it.
Well, and the thing that always gets me is, I come back to the question of what's your motivation and for wanting me to drink something.
Yeah.
I if you want to make sure I'm having a good time, I'll have a good time. I'll we can check in, we can talk about whatever, but I can handle the drinking component of all of this. Mm-hmm. I will say that the more I meet and engage with people who drink regularly and who take it very seriously as a hobby, the more I find people that will respect those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's because that seriousness, they recognize the responsibility of not pushing people. Because if you sit down at a friend's house, and I've done this a couple of times, where you get a group of people together to do some sort of tasting event, if there's 20 or 30 bottles of spirits on the table, you can't push people, or they will have real problems. It's got to be something that you do at a slow, small, measured pace to be able to have the experience, to enjoy the experience, and then to not leave the place drunk. And people think it's like impossible to do that. There's a way to do that. You're not going to necessarily get drunk if you go through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Don't taste the ones you've tasted before. If you take a nip of something you don't like, don't finish it. There's a lot of things you can do. But the people that I've experienced at those events, they're not going to push you. Now, I will say I've got some friends that if I'm sitting there and drinking the same drink for about an hour, they'll give me a little ribbing. But I also know that it's good natured and that they're not going to keep coming back to it. It's a one-off. It's a joke. We can all laugh about it together, right?
Right.
And go back to it. So I think there's also this familiarity component. If you're with friends and your friends are giving you a little bit of a ribbing, it's very different than somebody who either you don't know very well or somebody who keeps coming back to it and keeps pushing. That's when you start to have to reevaluate, like, why are you so interested? If it's one off, I get it. But what's going on here?
Yeah. What are you going to get out of the idea that I'm going to have more when I don't want it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Why do you think that I should want it?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where you get into the question for them. That's the self-reflection that they need to do. And a lot of people haven't done it. Mm-hmm. If you haven't spent a lot of time around spirits and, forced yourself to think about there's almost a responsibility. You have to treat this stuff with respect because it can literally kill you if you're not careful. And I think that having that respect for the spirit and the process and the consumption all kind of works together. It's a respect for the whole endeavor that I think very frequently pushes people away from overindulgence because they understand how much time and effort went into the product. And you want it slow.
Yeah, well, and I think that it's an appreciation thing too. I mean, I'm kind of comparing this in my head right now to, if you're going to have a whole lot to drink at one time, you're not going to appreciate it. You're probably not even going to notice it. And I'm thinking it's sort of like if you sit down and really, really listen to a Beethoven symphony. Right?
Yeah.
Like how many people even do that anymore? We're all doing other things. Right. We put it on as background music. Right. We hear it in a movie, and in a movie we might pay more attention because it's going to bring the drama out or whatever. Yes. But because I did this just like a week ago, I went out for a walk and I was listening to the second movement of Beethoven's Second Symphony, and it did make it much more cinematic. I really could.
I'm sure it did.
Could appreciate it. I mean, I'm looking up at the trees that are blooming and all of that, and listening to the birds through the Beethoven, and it did. It really. There were moments where I felt like I was in a movie. But even if I didn't go outside, even if I just sat down with a pair of headphones on and listened to that for the not quite 10 minutes that it takes, you notice so much more than you do if it's just, playing at the restaurant while you're having dinner with a friend and you're barely conscious that it's there. And I think that there's a lot more to get out of not just a symphony or a good drink that we don't even notice anymore because we're so busy trying to do 86 things at one moment.
Absolutely. I'm actually really glad you brought that up for a couple of reasons. First off, I love music. And so I've got a record player and a large record collection. And part of the reason I enjoy records so much and that I gravitate towards records is it kind of forces you to sit down and have the musical experience. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more difficult when you're going to have to get up every 20 minutes and flip a record over or replace a record. It's a lot more difficult to set it and forget it and have music just be straight up background. The music becomes the experience. Mm-hmm. And I think with spirits, I'm a big believer in that as well. There are spirits that you can have as sort of background, or they can accompany a meal, or you can drink while you're playing a game or something. That's much more. For me, it's a different kind of spirit. There's something that are much more either simplistic or subtle and quiet, not in the sense of having to pull out specific notes, but in the sense that there's not a lot happening in the spirit. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's very valuable. If I have a relatively low dollar glass of whiskey, I don't feel bad about not paying attention to it. I can have a sip of it while I'm playing a board game with friends or while I'm having a conversation. But when you start bringing out some of these very expensive whiskeys, and boy, do they get expensive quick. They have some out there that are $600 or $700. If you're paying that much for a bottle of whiskey, there's a lot more expensive too. Those are just the ones I've been able to have. But if you are paying that much for a bottle of whiskey, you better freaking focus on it. That better be the center of attention. That's like the piece de resistance. It has to be. So it's going to be a very different drinking experience, and you have to approach it differently. But I think that Beethoven's a really great example because there's so much nuance and interesting musical architecture, essentially, that's so layered and developed and subtle that you almost do it a disservice if you don't give it the focus. You're going to miss so much. Luckily, it's much easier to replicate with technology. Listening to Beethoven again, it can be harder to do that with some of these expensive spirits, but I think the logic is very much the same.
Yeah, and too much Beethoven at one time is probably not going to leave you incapacitated.
Well, there's that.
So maybe if it does, it'll probably be in a good way.
Well, I was thinking, yeah, that might be true, but I was also thinking, like, if you listen to Beethoven for 6 hours straight, you're going to get a little sick of Beethoven.
Yes.
Probably. It's going to be too much.
Right.
When you have something that's that delicate and nuanced and engaging, you can't do it over and over and over again in a row, or you're just going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, like anything else. Yeah,
absolutely.
We've totally lost our sense of moderation in many ways, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Which is a shame. Yeah. So I've seen your YouTube channel, and you were having so much fun on your YouTube channel that the fact that I don't really drink and I'm probably never going to try whatever it was that you were talking about didn't even matter. So I'm curious to know how it is that you decided to do YouTube. Like, were you already doing workshops and things like for friends or for like a side business, or did you just get up and say, hey, YouTube is a thing, let's do this?
That's I'm looking back, it wasn't that long ago I started this channel. I wish I had a better answer for why I started doing it. It kind of just came spur of the moment. I think what had happened, honestly. Yeah, right. I think honestly what happened was I'd always said to myself, I wanted a passion project. When I have a creative, energy inside of me, and I just feel compelled to do something. I've always felt that way with music. I've always felt that way with cooking and food. But I wanted to do something where I could, create something for other people to engage with. And I have trouble with the performative aspect of music in a lot of ways. For a variety of different reasons, but it never really felt right to me to perform on a stage. Most of the music that I make that I really enjoy the most is stuff I make just sitting with a couple friends in my music room, just working on stuff and recording on the computer. But that always kind of felt like, I don't know, it didn't quite scratch the right itch for me. There was a performative aspect of art that I really enjoy. I think the first thing I ever really did perform in a performative way was poetry. I was writing poetry in grade school, I think, and writing it and reading it and doing poetry events and stuff. So I've always liked the performance in some regard. And I did do a lot of music performance in high school. I was in marching band. I was in a drum corps. So I think that finding a new way to talk about to perform and to talk about spirits just kind of naturally coalesced because I enjoyed the spirits. And I had seen people do YouTube channels before. I had friends that did that kind of, I have friends that do videography. I have friends that work on other YouTube channels. So I had a lot of connections with that medium. And I had never really considered it actually, though, until my girlfriend got me into YouTube more. I had seen one-off videos, but there are a lot of channels out there that make regular content, just like a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And that had never even occurred to me. So being, sort of brought into this new world and awoken to the YouTube universe, and seeing all these people just like me, hanging out with some friends and turning it into a video and then having millions of people watch it. I thought that is such an incredible tool. I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of this community. And I had at this time been sort of diving deeper and deeper into the whiskey community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went, well, I bet there's a whiskey community online.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking around, and sure enough, I found lots of channels making videos on this stuff. But the one thing that caught me was I always kind of felt like there was a low energy engagement, which is there's nothing wrong with that. There's a way to have a relaxing, soothing experience on YouTube, and have it be valuable and enjoy the spirit along with the person shooting the video. But that's not my energy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm high energy. I get excited. I am invigorated by all of this stuff. I get, my girlfriend always tells me to talk quieter because I get loud and excited. I'm just so enamored with this world of new flavors and experiences. So I felt like there was a space for me, this guy that's just excited about what he's doing and wants to share it with you in that kind of high energy way. It was really just a fun, coming together of a lot of different things that I was seeing around me and enjoying, and it's all come together pretty well so far.
Yeah, I think the fact that you are so excited about it is what makes it so much fun. Even if I'm not necessarily in it to say, oh, I want to see what he thinks about this thing that I was thinking about trying, because I'm probably not going to. But it's still fun to watch you go through the process of explaining it and getting excited. In fact, I think there was even a little label that came up and said, "Excited Kyle," and I was like, yes, you are. Yeah,
I've been having fun learning video editing too, and there was one of the videos I do. It's the William LaRue Weller tasting. I got really happy about learning how to do like a slow zoom in.
Mm-hmm.
And I added this music over top of it so you could see this like hallelujah moment when I first taste this very rare whiskey. I was having way too much fun in the editing room. I was laughing so loud. My girlfriend came in and was like, "What are you laughing about?" I said, look what I've done. She wasn't as impressed as I was, but it's okay.
But you know what? I think if you're having fun, it's like anything else. It's like, I tell people when they're writing or painting or, making music or whatever, if you're having fun, other people are going to have fun with it too. If you're not having any fun writing your book, nobody is going to have fun reading it.
Right. Oh, totally.
So yeah. And even making music, I mean, you can tell if a performer doesn't really want to be there, and you feel really it comes through. So yeah, I think that you are having so much fun and you're so excited is a major asset. What have you learned along the way aside from video editing?
Oh yeah, I've learned a lot. I've learned, obviously video editing, lighting is maybe the biggest thing, kind of as an aside on that point. But like, I had to buy some soft boxes. I had to learn about how to light myself and to make a studio space that felt both natural and comfortable, without being sort of like too plasticine and manufactured. The spirit world is something I've really dug into and explored these different flavors and interesting profiles. I've also learned a lot about how glassware can affect what you're drinking. I think that might be the biggest change. I had always drank whiskey out of a pretty standard rocks glass that you'd see in like a Mad Men episode. I very quickly have moved away from that and moved towards what they call a Glencairn glass. And it's sort of a tulip shaped glass with a long fluted top. And, using that kind of glass with a bulb at the end and spinning the spirit around really moves the alcohol and changes the flavor profile and changes the nose. I'm amazed how different it tastes when you drink it out of a different glass. That's something that I'd never expected.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here nodding my head at you because when I went to IPNC, the world's most ignorant wine snob here, but there was an entire session that I wish I had a chance to go to. I can't remember now why I didn't make it, but I didn't. But the I think his name's George Riedel from the Riedel Glass Company. Like they make a glass for each varietal of wine.
Yes.
And, and I saw that because I'm ignorant, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. I mean, there's like maybe a red glass and a white glass, right? But really, what's the big deal? And like everybody got a stemless Riedel Pinot Noir glass as, part of your little gift bag when you got there. So I still have that, but there were people talking about it afterwards and saying, yeah, it really makes this huge difference. And I didn't appreciate it until I went to this thing, which is part of when I was sort of retroactively curious, which didn't work very well for me. Can't really wind back the clock and go. But yeah, I've heard that before. And I have a feeling it probably surprises a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, it does. And, one of the fun experiments I've done several times is I'll put the exact same amount of the same spirit in a rocks glass and in one of these Tulip Glencairn glasses. And I'll have people try it in each glass. And I won't tell them generally that's the same spirit. I'll just say, which one do you like more? And the interesting thing so far is that typically the men like the Tulip glass more and the women like the rocks glass more. I started reading about this, and part of the logic is about sensitivity of your nose. If you can pick up scents more closely and you have a more nuanced nasal palate, for lack of a better term, you will not like the Tulip glass as much because it focuses the ethanol too much and becomes too much burn in your nose. So people that have very sensitive noses will definitely err towards a small rocks glass, whereas people that can't pick up as much scent will love these Tulip glasses because all that scent is being concentrated and shot into their nostrils.
Wow.
So it was a very cool experience to give that to a room of 10 different people. I think it was 3 women and 7 men, and only one person bucked that trend. It was very interesting to see.
That is interesting. And it kind of implies that, we have different senses of smell depending on our packaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that though.
The fun experiment. And it's the kind of thing too where, my fun anecdote aside about your sense of smell and your sensitivity, it's a really important thing to do to improve your own experience. One of my friends that was at that event, the matter of fact, the only male who preferred the rocks glass, he now brings rocks glasses with him because a lot of these tasting events, they only have Glencairn glasses. And he has so much of a better experience because he's not getting so much of that ethanol burn. So, being able to learn more about yourself and what you enjoy is so helpful to improving the whole atmosphere of an event like that, where you're going to be tasting things, like you mentioned, that you've never tried before. I can't recommend it enough. And it's so easy to do. If you've got 3 different kinds of glasses, you've got a wine glass, you've got a tumbler or a rocks glass, and maybe you even have, like a small champagne flute or something. You put it in each of those 3 glasses and see which one you like the best, because you might be surprised.
It's so interesting to me how many layers there are to all of this. You think of something like alcohol as you try something, you decide that this is the thing that you like. And it, I feel like, wine gets all the focus on all of the different nuance and all of that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I watched your channel that I thought, wow, there's a lot hidden in here too. And the one that I remember, there was a moment when you put like just a drop of water in the whiskey, and you sort of seem to feel like you had to justify that to the purists, like why you would do that. But I was so fascinated by the difference in what you noticed before you did that and the difference afterwards. And it's, it's a drop of water. It's the shape of a glass.
Yeah, the water is a fun one for me for a couple of different reasons, because we talked before about whiskey snobs. There are people that just find adding ice or water to spirits, particularly with whiskey, but you see it with almost every spirit. If people are doing, engaged tasting, they're like, "Oh, you added water to that? That's how dare you?" And I think that's so misguided. First off, if you look at the history of whiskey, if you go to Scotland and Ireland, a lot of times they will add water to their whiskey because historically they always did. So first off, there you go. The people that were inventing this stuff 1,000 years ago add it. So why can't you? But even more importantly, like I said before about, maximizing your experience, adding a couple drops of water can really change the profile on a whiskey. It opens up all of these different components. And I think a lot of it really is due to adding a new element, and
Mm-hmm.
water just being a very neutral element. It kind of breaks up these bonds that are otherwise being formed, and that have had a long time to sort of coalesce in the bottle. So you're forcing the whiskey to sort of reevaluate's the wrong word. It implies way too much knowledge for the whiskey to have, but you know what I mean. It's really kind of changing the composition in a fun way. But talking about the wine, sort of the large world of wine and wine enthusiasm and sommeliers and things like that. I think a big part of the spirit world that's being adopted into that enthusiasm comes out of barrel aged spirits. Things like whiskey are on the forefront of my mind, but there are others that you're putting in oak barrels, and they're changing the flavors. I know that cognac and Armagnac are getting a lot more of a following now. So brandy's is kind of having a moment, and I've seen a lot of other kinds of spirits that are now being barrel aged. When I was in Amsterdam, I picked up a bottle of barrel aged Genevieve, which is a precursor to gin, and this was put in virgin oak for 10 years, which is just like what they do with bourbon. And when you take a drink of it, it tastes like a juniper forward bourbon. It's a very strange experience. But I've also seen tequilas that they're doing barrel aging, and there was a moment there where mezcal was really getting popular because of the smoky components in it. There are a lot of nuances in these spirits that come out of time spent in oak barrels. And are you using a brand new barrel or one that's been used before? And what was in this barrel before? All of those
Mm-hmm.
components make radical changes to the flavor profile, and it's easy to appreciate those differences because they're so pronounced. When you're comparing side by side, 4 or 5 different 8-year-old or 9-year-old spirits that have been aged for the same amount of time, it can be harder to find, because then you're talking about, well, what's the composition of the spirit? What went into the grains that were then distilled? What about the distillation process? What about the stills that were used to distill the whiskey? That's a big one people don't think about, because a pot still is just going to have one point of entry for the liquor after it's being distilled into the storage container, whereas a column still has multiple points of entry, and so you get a much narrower flavor. Those elements do change the flavor a lot, but it's a lot harder to pick that up for a layman coming in and just taking a
Mm-hmm.
sip out of a glass. But if you taste a scotch that's been aged in a sherry barrel, you're going to taste the sherry, you're going to smell the sherry, and then you have that exact same spirit or something very much like it that was just put into oak, and it's a totally different experience, and almost anybody can pick that out. So I feel like that's a really great entry point for people who want to learn more about these spirits, because you can pretty easily find, if you're at a bar that's got more than 2 or 3 scotches, you're going to be able to find things that have been aged in port barrels and sherry barrels and Madeira casks. There's a lot of wine components that are coming into the Scotch world and now into the bourbon world. That was historically not something that was done very much. But I almost forgot my favorite one: Caribbean rum casks. Adds a really interesting sweetness to the spirit.
Wow. Well, and I was just going to ask you, like, where do you recommend people start? So that seems like
Yeah.
you've sort of answered that, but I'll bet you have more to say about
I'm sure I do.
it.
uh, I think that a lot of the starting point depends on where you're at right now. I think that people who have a hard time with any alcohol burn, and just can't really get their head around drinking a spirit neat, good place to start is cocktails. And I like to focus on cocktails that are sort of one spirit driven. So if you want to learn more about clear spirits, gin and tonics, or you can go with a vodka tonic, or you can go with a martini, things like that, where there's not going to be a lot of other noise around the spirit, but you're not going to get straight alcohol burn. There's going to be more happening. And then over time, you can find elements that you like and that you don't like, and then move either into straight spirits from that world, or you can develop different tastes for different kinds of cocktails and different kinds of spirits from that world. I think if you're looking into getting into the world of whiskey, which is where I sort of am growing out of into the cocktail world, I'm kind of coming at this in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
if you're wanting to get into whiskey, go to the classics, the old fashioned, the Manhattan, just very classic cocktails. In the near future, I'm going to do a video where I'm going to make an old fashioned with a scotch, a smoky scotch, with a bourbon, and with a rye. And I can kind of highlight all the different flavor profiles because they're going to be very different drinks. All that really is sugar, a hint of fruit, and bitters, and the whiskey. In terms of not having a problem with the little bit of burn from a straight spirit, I think one of the best places to start is figuring out what you like. So go to broad categories. Try a very quintessential bourbon, something like Wild Turkey 101, a Buffalo Trace. Four Roses is really common and really popular. Maker's Mark is a really common and popular one. A lot of times people come in on those whiskeys because they're very sweet. They're very pleasant to a standard American palate. So you're going to probably find something there you like. You can explore some more and get into interesting areas with, Irish whiskeys too. People are very familiar with Jameson, but Redbreast is maybe one of the best out there in terms of doing something different with an Irish whiskey and making something that's really enjoyable. Middleton's another company that makes good Irish whiskeys. A lot of these companies are kind of incestuous. They all kind of related to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But the branding is the easiest to spot on the bar. So don't worry too much about that. There's basically one company in Ireland that makes almost all their whiskey. There's a lot of, in terms of percentage of whiskey bought from Ireland. And then, with Scotch, there's 4 different regions. No, maybe there's probably more than that. I don't want to give bad information, but if you ask somebody what the major regions of Scotland are, they're going to probably give you 4 or 5 major regions. You're going to have Highlands, you're going to have Islay, you're going to have Midlands. I won't go through all of them because you can break down little pieces too with like Campbelltown and things like that, where there are specific regions that have really fought to maintain independence from these other regions and say, no, our Scotch is different. But that's a whole other world. It's definitely worth exploring, some major players in those categories. People know Glenmorangie, they know Glenlivet, they know Macallan. Those are brands that people, like I said, at a whiskey bar that has more than 2 or 3 different whiskeys, they're going to have something from those categories. So I think it's always good to start there and then figure out what you like and don't like. And don't be afraid to not like stuff. If you don't like something, you don't like it. Or if you like a component of it, but you don't like a different component of it, that's sort of the next level, is breaking down what you're enjoying about it. I'll go back to the bourbon for a second. I think, when people first drink Buffalo Trace, which is a very common bourbon, well, it used to be. It's becoming harder to find because of the bourbon craze has grown so much in the last few years. But if you drink a Wild Turkey or a Buffalo Trace, the first thing a lot of people will say is, well, this is very smooth. That's another thing that a lot of whiskey snobs have a real problem with, is using the descriptor smooth. And I think that's foolish. I think there's no problem with calling a whiskey smooth. You just have to recognize it's not a flavor note. Smoothness is a feeling. It's an experience of the whiskey. All right, it's smooth. Why do you think it's smooth? Is it oily in your mouth, or is it more like water? Is there any alcohol burn at all? When do you feel it? Do you feel it right away? Do you feel it later? Do you feel it after you drank it and it burns all the way down your chest? We call that a Kentucky hug. There's all kinds of different components that you can break out of the term smooth. So I think it's really valuable to kind of push yourself. If you're trying to go on this journey without a Sherpa, think about why I feel those ways, why I am having this experience, what else is going on there. The actually pulling out specific flavor notes is relatively late in the game. The first step is, do I like it or do I not? Then, okay, what kind of descriptors do I have? Is it oily? Is it smooth? Is it sharp? Is it smoky? Is it, whatever? And then you can start to pull out different individual flavor notes. And the more you do that, then after that, it's just experience. The more you play around with it, the more you try different things, the more you find. The one other big note I'll say for people who want to get into this world is comparisons. It's really hard to taste a whiskey and then the next day taste a different whiskey and say, oh, I see how those are different. Because your memory will definitely play tricks on you. I know mine does. So if I sit down 3 different whiskeys in a row, and like I said before, not full pours. You can do this with 10 whiskeys, but if you do little 1/4 ounce pours and you do it over a period of time, you're not going to come out any worse for wear. And I think that's really important for this to be an enjoyable experience and something that's sustainable in any kind of way. You sit down with a couple different pours, you'll really notice the differences then. I'll taste a Buffalo Trace, then I go taste the Glenlivet, and suddenly all these interesting, almost salty notes will come out that you don't expect from that smooth and unoffensive of a pour. It's not a challenging pour at all, but it becomes more challenging if you pair it next to something that's just almost syrupy sweet, like maybe a Maker's Mark or a Four Roses. So start doing those comparisons if you want to learn more about that world. That's actually another thing I want to make some videos on is having me in the moment doing these side-by-side comparisons. I actually just did a video, which is up on the channel now, where I compared, this is kind of next level comparison, but I compared two different barrel picks from Barrel Rye is the company that they make this. They actually import this really good Canadian rye whiskey. And one of them was at 70% alcohol. And the other one was 77% alcohol. I had never seen a commercial spirit at that high of a percentage that wasn't like Everclear or something that was basically made to kill ticks or something.
Right.
Like I'd never seen anything like this. But it was really interesting to do the side-by-side because I posted a video about just reviewing one of these two pours, and it was like jet fuel. It was really hard to drink. It was really hard for me to get good notes out of. But then when I did the side-by-side, I pulled out so many more interesting notes. I got this really interesting apple fruit orchard kind of characteristic out of one of the pours that I didn't have before. That experience wasn't there when I drank it on its own. And it's because of the priming. When I primed myself for this 70% whiskey with a 77% whiskey, it felt like a step down, and suddenly all those flavor notes became more prominent. So, don't be afraid to do comparisons. I'm hoping to do a lot more of those because I really enjoy them.
Well, and it seems to me like if somebody wants to get into this and does feel like they need to have a Sherpa, since you use that term, that your YouTube channel might be a good place for them to find one.
Oh, absolutely. And if they got questions, I love answering questions. I've got all kinds of ways you can reach me: Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. It's all the Drink Pro. If you type the Drink Pro, you should be able to find me. And, I love talking with people about this stuff. Obviously, I'm pretty excited about it today. So if people want to learn, they want to figure out where to start, or they know they don't like, any of these things and they want some guidance, I'm happy to offer it because, I want this to be something everyone can enjoy. And you don't have to do it all the time, and you don't have to become obsessed with it like I am. But knowing how to enjoy it, I think, is a really cool life experience that I want as many people to get as that can.
Well, that's fantastic. And I will definitely link to all of those places so that people can find you even more easily if they forget how to look you up. But thank you so much for this. This has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I've had a blast talking about it.
That's it for this week. Many thanks to Kyle Fletcher and to you for joining me. You'll find all the links to Kyle's work in the show notes at fycuriosity.com. If you enjoy the show, please leave me a review on iTunes. It really helps me find new listeners. Thanks so much. You can find show notes, the 6 creative beliefs that are screwing you up, and more at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.